Alright, welcome back everybody. I know I just released that other video this morning. Got everything done I wanted to get done today, so I'm getting this footage out there now. Thankfully, I got everything done, so all I gotta do is put the baffle on tomorrow and the fuel sender, and we're good to go. Right here you can see me installing the little trap door that I fabricated. This is one of the requirements for the flop tube. That way, during unusual attitudes, the idea is that little trap door will flop down and prevent a bulk of the fuel from rushing straight out of that tank, and try and keep some of it behind so that the pickup tube has something to pick up. So that's fabricated, it's installed. Now I need to get the vent line in, so I'm just running it through that piece of walnut there and straightening it out. Just figured I'd slow this down for those that didn't catch on how I did this last time. Works really good for straightening out soft tubing. Nice and quick, don't have to fight with it. So, thought this was going to be a lot easier today, and yeah, you guys fell. This happens a couple times. Thought this would be a lot easier just throwing the end ribs in, but I forgot with the with the flop tube in this left tank, there's a bunch of other accessories that need to go in, like that trap door, and there you go again. I also need to make a couple of these little anti-fouling guides, and the plans really don't give you any direction, and there you go again. Don't really give you any direction on how to go with this, so you just kind of got to look at it, see what others have done, and make it work so that the flop tube doesn't get hung up on things when it's flopping around. So here's what I came up with for mine. And there it is installed. You can see the trapdoor really well now too. So now I'm temporarily installing the inboard rib. I need to see where the vent line is supposed to come out so I can get the vent line bent and get it flared with the B-nut on it so that it'll line up later on when I put that thing in place. And you would have had a great view of the bending if it wasn't for where I placed that rivet gun, but you get the idea. Make sure to put the B-nut on and the collar first. Get the flaring tool on there. Didn't like the way the first flare came out. It actually slipped on me and overflared, so I had to cut it off and do it again. Also, don't forget to put a little lube on the flare. Makes it come out a lot nicer. Marking where the other end needs to be so I can cut it this time before I put the end rib in. Makes life easier. And then this line is the 3/8 line that I'm going to use for my fuel return for fuel injection. And I'm just now realizing I can't do exactly what I did on the right tank. On the right tank, I had that fuel return go to the second bay, which is what I was prepared to do on this one. You just want to get it far enough away from the fuel pickup so that you're not creating a lot of air bubbles and ingesting those air bubbles into the fuel line and then causing issues. But on this tank, the second bay is now where the fuel float for the sender is going to go, and having thought about it for a minute, I decided it probably wasn't a good idea to have fuel dumping back in on top of that float. So I decided to make the tube longer, pop a hole in the next rib over, and extend it to the third bay. There's a close-up of me making the flare on it. Slowed the video down so you can see how that goes. I also make a little mark at the back side of the tube just to make sure as I'm flaring it, it doesn't slip and come out, so I know that I got a proper flare. There it is, all pretty and ready to go. Once I got it into that third bay, I gave the end of it a downward bend, so it's not just shooting straight across to the opposite rib. It should just kind of dump back into the fuel that's in that tank. Next up, I need to make an anti-fouling kind of guide for the hatch cover here so that the flop tube doesn't get caught up on the nut plates, which normally would probably be a bigger problem because Vans uses the open nut plates, so it could get caught on the end of all of the screws that are sticking in the tank. In my case, I have those enclosed ones, which makes it a little easier since they're rounded. It tends to not want to stick to them anyways, but you'll see some of that here in a minute. It did take me 3 different designs of that thing though. The first one I thought I could just straddle a couple of the nut plates and make that good, but it wasn't very sturdy. Didn't think it would last, so I made another one, trimmed it down in the middle, and then just made a countersunk rivet to attach it to the ring. And now you see me installing the flop tube again temporarily so I can see just how this is going to hang up or not hang up. Because I also realized I made that guide really shallow and the nut plates are deeper than that, so I wasn't sure if it was going to do me any good or not. So you can see without it, it is possible for the tube to just barely get caught right there. Doesn't take much movement to get it off of there, but if that tube ever starts to stiffen up, which I guess they can over time, I don't want it to get stuck there and then suck nothing but air instead of fuel. So now I'm going to try it with that little guide plate I made, and it is just deep enough that it keeps the tube far enough away that it cannot catch on any of those. So that should do what it's supposed to do, and since it's going to sit upright most of the time anyways, if it does start to stiffen up over time, it should do so in more of a downward position, which would make it more like a normal fuel pickup at that point. So countersink the holes I made for that so it sits underneath the rib just fine, and get that thing riveted in place. No sealant's needed on that part right there because it's not going through to the outside. Things definitely go much quicker when you don't have to mix sealant up for everything. Speaking of, now it's time to actually install the ring, and there's that tooling hole that has to get filled with sealant, and I'm just running a small bead around the inside edge. Again, those nut plates are sealed, so I'm just trying to make sure that fuel can't get in between the rib and the plate and get up in there that way. And I'll do a fillet around the outside of it, but I didn't put any actually on the flange itself. Just like I did on the other tank, I'm using the screws to hold the nut plates in place, and it gives me a nice little guide to butt the squeezer up against and set the rivets. The rivets are very, very hard to set on these ones because of how big the back shell is. Definitely takes some practice, and these aren't particularly cheap nut plates, so you definitely don't want to be destroying them in the process. I did have one where the back shell popped off though right after I pulled the screw back out of it. Thankfully it was a spare. Not sure what happened with that, but it just came undone. Shouldn't happen to the ones that are riveted in because the rivets will hold them in place. Time for more sealant. I'm going to go ahead and get that outboard end rib permanently installed. It's got that little nose trim piece that you see me kind of buttering up there, and that's just to help seal the nose section better because there's obviously no rivets right there in the tip of the nose. And since the rib itself is notched, this just gives you something else you can build sealant up against. So a few 470 rivets to hold it. And just like I did on the other one, I should have capped those rivets while this thing was out. It would have been much easier to get to, but I didn't. I didn't figure it out until it was in there, and it's a very, very tight bay to get your arm into, but I think I got it all done. I may put a little on the outside of the rivets just for some extra precaution, but we'll see. For now it's in there and doing its job. The nice thing about the end ribs, the flange faces the outside, so you notice when I was buttering it up, I didn't actually smear sealant all over the flange. According to Van's video, that's pointless. You just need it along the inside edge. So you want to make sure you get that and then get a good fillet on the inside so fuel just can't get to the flange. It also means you can squeeze all of these rivets, which makes that much nicer. Getting out the spatula and finishing the fillets off. There you can see just how tight it is getting down in that bay. So onward to the inboard rib. This is the one that's got everything going on. Fuel return line, vent line, the fuel pickup. Here you can see me. I got the torque wrench out. I'd already done the conversion for using a crow's foot. I torqued on the fuel pickup, and now I'm adding safety wire to it per the drawing. I wasn't going to put this in until the rib was in, but I decided it was going to be easier to do this now. There's a shot of it in there. You can see the weld that's holding my fitting in. I still think that was a good move. And now I'm just preemptively slathering a little fillet of sealant around where the weld is at, just to make sure it's totally sealed. And now I'm buttering up the inside of that entire doubler piece. I have one little countersunk 1097 rivet to help hold that in place for me. There, you saw me just set that, and now same as the other rib. Just butter up the edge, get it ready to go. I tuck the tube in right there so it wouldn't be flopping around and getting covered in sealant. And then go install it. Populate the holes with rivets, go through and squeeze them and get them all set. And even though those should have been mostly dry, there was some sealant that squeezed through. Still totally fine. A little extra sealant's not going to hurt anything right there. This is the outside tank attach bracket. Now that everything else is in, it can go on, and then it's got some -7 length 470 rivets to hold it on, and the only way to get those in is with the rivet gun and a bucking bar, and it's pretty much impossible to feel and see down inside of there, so hopefully I got those set really well. If not, it's also got a whole bunch of sealant all over it, so between that and the fitting and everything else, I think it's going to be okay. I still got to put the jam nut on the fuel fitting as well. And now I'm just getting the fuel fittings for the fuel return and the vent line installed and getting those things attached. There's no way to keep sealant from smearing on the threads of those, which is unfortunate. You definitely don't need sealant on the threads. They seal through the mating surface, but it's there anyways, so those B-nuts aren't going to come off on their own anytime soon. Last item is the inspection plate or cover plate. You missed it, but I did put sealant on that, and now I'm just putting the screws in and making sure I get a little tiny squeeze out around the whole thing. And that's it. This is what it looks like finished. You can see all the interior parts. Hope you all enjoyed it. Stick around for the baffle. See ya.